We are going to start. Welcome to this 1 hour with us. I'm William Mugayar from the Token Summit, and I am joined by Thomas Linder and Luca Muller from MME and Sebastian Bergel from Hopper. They are all of them in Switzerland. I'm in Toronto, and we are going to talk about decentralized autonomous associations. For context, this is really part of the DAO context, and I'm going to assume that the audience is quite familiar with the concept and that we have an advanced audience, so there's no need to go through the history. But in terms of context, what I'm seeing in the evolution of DAOs is that the first generation of DAOs were just in the wild without any legal attachment. That's what happened 3 years ago when we had the DAO. Then I saw the second generation of DAOs that started as DAOs, but then they added a legal wrapper on the DAO concept. And I'm seeing now a third generation of DAOs where the starting point is an actual association or an actual organization that already has a legal construct, that already has some legal administrative paperwork that's already been done. And then they add a DAO concept to to what they currently have. And that's kind of where the DAA falls in. So let's start with Thomas and with the presentation to talk about the background of the DAA and how did you think about it and where does it fit in the concept of DAOs in general and how different it is as we go forward. Okay, Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, William, with pleasure. I mean, in general, if we discuss governance of decentralized ecosystems, I think we always need to first define what do we actually mean, or what interaction do we want to govern? Because in decentralized ecosystems, you have different aspects. You have either you have the whole network that needs some governance. Usually this is a technology, from a technological point of view. On the other hand, you want to perform maybe a specific project that needs to have governance. On the other hand, you can implement the governance on-chain, governed by smart contracts, or you can do it off-chain by just what we are doing already without blockchain. I think then on the other hand, next category, you need to decide, is it a community-based governance, permissionless, everyone can join, and we need to implement certain means of communication, or is it very specific, one orchestrator, a permissioned community, and we know each member, etc. So that needs completely different types of interactions. And the last decision we need to make is what's actually the purpose of our endeavor. Is it the investment purpose? Do we want to implement membership rights, voting mechanisms, or do we want to allocate certain assets to a certain purpose? And depending on these categories, it might be a totally different legal setup that we need in order to be successul. If we look at the DAO, I think that the DAO was a very community-based project with an on-chain project governance, and there was a very specific investment purpose. So I would define it as a kind of a public permissionless kind of thing in order to invest in very specific projects, etc. And so there was this clear investment purpose, but on the other hand, it was public and permissionless. And if we look, I mean, there was the claim by the project team that this creates some kind of a new way of collaboration or a new way of organization. And I think from a mere technology point of view, that was true. So this was smart contract based, etc. But if we look from a mere legal point of view, what is happening there, it's nothing new, because since centuries we know in civil law jurisdictions the concept of a simple partnership. What is a simple partnership? Is actually just if several people are doing kind of something together with unite their efforts, unite their resources, and they have a common goal. They are already a simple partnership. You don't need to do anything kind of formally, you just need to act together. And if I look at the DAO, that's actually happening by the interaction with the smart contract. You unite your efforts, unite your resources, and you try to achieve a certain goal. So from a legal point of view, if no legal entity is involved, this simple partnership is like a fallback rule. So it applies to all interactions of parties that try to achieve a common goal. And the problem is that if you qualify as a simple partnership, there is liability. So there is a personal liability of all the partners jointly for all the obligations that the other partners actions result in, and that might be, or that is a big risk of such partnerships. So there is liability and of individuals. So it's the individuals acting together. So it cannot be a blockchain account. It's not the partner. It's the individual interacting with this blockchain account and initiating certain transactions. There's liability for taxation, income tax, VAT, whatever is done. Then from a regulatory point of view, because there is an investment purpose, most probably, and that was then also the SEC conclusion, you qualify as a security, and then dependent on the partners where their residency is, one is in Canada, one in the US, one in Switzerland, one in China, actually you can trigger all liabilities all over the world. And because everyone is jointly liable, I'm in Switzerland, I'm liable for some actions in the US, for some actions in China. So that can create a lot of risks. And what we tried at the time, if we look back at the time of Ethereum, when Ethereum started their ecosystem and want to launch the protocol, there we established a foundation in Switzerland. A foundation in Switzerland allows assets to be used for a very specific predefined purpose. So you have a legal entity, you have a predefined purpose, and you allocate assets to it, and that's it. And then these assets can only be used for this very specific purpose. So for us, this legal entity is like a smart contract. On the other hand, you don't have any members, you don't have shareholders, you don't have specific beneficiaries. And that kind of centralizes the governance to one orchestrator, that's the foundation, but it allows kind of the community to allocate their assets to the foundation and to have trust that these assets can only be used for this very specific purpose. But on the other hand, if you want to create a community with members, where you want to implement voting, where you have memberships, then the foundation is not the right structure. For that, if we look into the civil law in Switzerland, we have an association. The association is kind of a community of members, and each member has usually one vote. And it's not a capital-driven legal entity. It's really a voting-driven, membership-driven legal entity. And the advantage is that it is a legal entity, and it is at itself liable for its own actions and not the members are liable. So here we can kind of we can create two layers. So we have the membership layer where members can vote, etc. However, we have also this legal entity layer where the risks for the members can be limited. That's why we tried to take this association model from the Swiss civil law and try to implement all the interactions between members and the legal entity into smart contracts. And if we look at the overview, what these actions can be, so you see the individual member in the center of this visual diagram. So the member, they can provide funding, so they pay membership fee, they can provide donations. That's all smart contract based. They can propose and vote on projects to be supported. They can propose and vote on a change of articles of association. They can propose and vote on agenda items for the General Assembly. And at the General Assembly, they can also propose and vote for one delegate. And that's actually the only, let's say, kind of anchor to the real world. This delegate is like a physical person present in Switzerland in order to interact with the real world where needed. So if you need to file a tax return, someone needs to do it. If you want to defend certain trademark rights or whatever, someone needs to do it. So you need one delegate that is locally present. However, all the other interactions and transactions between the members and the legal entity is smart contract based. And can be done by a smart contract system in order that all these governance transactions and topics are really decentralized. And that was kind of the basic idea of this DAA, how we call it, so Decentralized Autonomous Association. So you take a legal concept that is already here since centuries, and on the other hand, you try to implement the governance on a smart contract basis and only have very, very specific, limited real world kind of connections where really needed.
Great. So based on what I'm hearing, Thomas, it seems to me that the hurdles to implementation, when you compare this to the Swiss Foundation model, are a lot lower with the association, right? How difficult is it to start an association compared to a foundation in the Swiss jurisdiction system?
Actually, it's very easy. So to start an association, you just come together as a group, like V4. So V4 sit together at the table. We draft the statutes of association, where we define our purpose, where we define how this purpose should be financed, what the membership fee should be. So that's one document. And when we sign the document, it's all done. So then the association is already in place. So you don't need like a legal act in front of a notary or any other kind of formal registration. It's really just the expression of the intention to incorporate such legal entity. That's already what is sufficient. And for the foundation, it's more complex. There you need a notarial deed. It needs to be registered with the commercial register. It's also under supervision of a federal authority, and also the financials need to be audited. So the foundation is much more formal because you don't have members, you don't have anyone that is actually controlling the use of assets, except the federal authorities. They are responsible to make sure that the assets can only be spent according to the purpose.
Okay, I want to come back and discuss the topic about what comes first. Is it the association or the legal aspect or the smart contracts? And we're going to come back to that when we bring Sebastian in a minute. But first, Luca, because you are also the architect, one of the architects behind the DAA, applying the DAA model to smart contracts. What was maybe give us a bit of the background, like what drove you to do this? What kind of need did you see that gave you the signal to seize this opportunity to create something new here?
Yeah, as Thomas already said in the introduction, if you just have a technical functionalities and you organize something based on technical functionalities only, you run into, or you can potentially run into, several legal risks. So you need somehow a legal anchor. So you need to have a synchronization between the technical functionality and, to a certain extent, a legal relevance as well as a legal definition to reduce risks and increase legal certainty. So that was actually the challenge which we faced. And what we saw is, especially after we actually in 2014 saw the revolutionary aspects of the Ethereum protocol to have this kind of two type of addresses. One being the smart contract addresses working as a issuer functionality on one side, and the, let's say, membership, shareholder, whatsoever, other address type, which allows you to connect an issuer with a member or a shareholder. Then we saw, okay, now we have these technical functionalities. Now what we need is to find a way, how can we make it, let's say, more legally tangible? And how can we synchronize a legal concept with a technical functionality? And that was the challenge. And then we said, okay, let's start to actually exercise and pilot it with the concept of an association, because an association has a minimum written proof of existence. That's what Thomas referred to as the articles of association. You need at least written articles of association, and these are, let's say, the only element which is the let's say, the proof of its existence, and it's also, let's say, the link to the off-chain world. So you have on one hand the, let's say, the written written governance rules. On the other hand, you have the functionalities on chain. So, and how do you synchronize now these off-chain written rules with the functionalities based on the on a smart contract system and the protocol? And that was the challenge which we actually faced, and this is what we tried to do. And if you start to program, and if you start to think, how you can actually implement governance functionalities like voting rights, dividend distributions, and things like this, then you're faced with a lot of challenges, and we will hear that later when Sebastian will talk about the challenges, of setting up these set of smart contracts.
Yes,
but
great.
Yeah,
sorry,
I mean that was our challenges, and that was it actually. And it's still an ongoing challenge now. It's, for example, if we look what's going on in Switzerland regarding the new DLT legislation. It's also about the synchronization of off-chain information, let's say shareholder rights, with functionalities. And that's a challenge which we have with these kind of decentralized systems.
Great. So let's talk about the technical aspects, because as you were saying, there is the legal aspects, obviously. there is the organizational aspect, the second aspect, and thirdly, there's the technical aspect. And all three of them have to work together. So let's go to Sebastian. Sebastian, you were part of Validity Labs when the smart contracts behind this construct were developed. So I want to go to you now on two aspects. The first part is when I want you to talk about the smart contracts that support this construct. And then later we're going to talk about your latest initiative, Hopper, which is really an association, and your plan to using this specifically as being a real proof of doing it with these contracts. So please,
Absolutely,
Sebastian.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So let me share my screen here. So what we've really been involved in here, William, as you said, was really building DAOs for the real world. And I would like to, while answering that, kind of go back to how we get there, like why I want to do that and why I'm really excited about it. And kind of looking at where this whole thing comes from is going back to what Thomas said, is I was looking at the first website of Ethereum that was online, right? And there was something that really struck me. Every single aspect that is listed on that website in early 2014 actually happened and is used in production today, which is amazing. How many startups can say that, right? And one of the aspects that we see here is actually these decentralized organizations. So they say create decentralized companies or organizations that operate entirely on the blockchain. And it shows a lot of the ethos that we had in these early days of building organizations entirely on the blockchain, right? So we had this frontier release. It was really this feeling of going to the Wild West in 2015, soon after Ethereum launched. And again, around the launch time, they were kind of giving a bunch of examples that you could code up, literally just copy pasting from the Ethereum website. So they had a simple token on the website. It was not yet ERC20. And the other thing, the last example, because it was the most complicated to understand for people, was actually what they called, interestingly enough, a decentralized, not a decentralized, but a democratic autonomous organization. And basically, the premise was a robot running your organization is guaranteed to execute only what it was programmed to. And that came back to us quite brutally a little bit later. Fast forward by another year, we have created what we called back then the mother of all DAOs, right? So the mother of all DAOs that was never, ever expected to have a whole lot of money, all of a sudden ended up having significantly north of $100 million, the biggest crowdfunding happening of all time. And the premise back then was, and I think it could have really played out like this, that DAOs, or more specifically, I would say the DAO, will be at the center of many economies going forward, right? So this was actually the website of DAO Hub in May 2016. And what we figured out only a few weeks later, quite brutally, is that, in fact, maybe code is not law, right? So the DAO basically had a few technical shortcomings that allowed funds to get drained. There was a whole lot of drama around this particular event, but effectively what it still showed us was that we can use DAOs, so decentralized organizations that are living on a blockchain, to really manage a whole lot of funds that have been distributed by have been created and contributed by a large number of people. Now, I think if this hadn't happened, this whole ICO craziness that we have seen would have played out entirely differently, that people would have gone to the DAO, asked for funding, and then worked on projects. That's what people really worked on. But the other thing that we learned in the wake of, in the aftermath and cleaning up of the DAO, was not just how to technically improve smart contract development, security. There was really a wealth of contributions that came from that. So I'm so grateful that this actually happened, even though it was obviously an accident, right? But what we also learned is that we somehow need to find out how code and law can work together, kind of hand in hand, right? So code is useful, law is useful, so let's make them play together. And you can kind of see this from two sides, right? So one is we have a DAO with a legal wrapper, right? So basically we glorify the DAO, and the only thing that we need is just a legal wrapper that represents it in the real world, as Thomas said, to like rent an office, right? Or sign agreements that only have to happen on paper. And the other view to it is that we really have a legal entity that is just has some on-chain governance, right? It's basically two sides of the same coin. And what we started on building then together with Emily at Validity Labs was a DAA, so a Decentralized Autonomous Association, that we implemented in Solidity. So for the ones here that are not into Ethereum-based coding, Solidity is just the most prominent software development language for Ethereum, right? So you can just write code that is then being executed on the Ethereum blockchain. And what we built on high level is really the minimal feature set of a fully functional Swiss association. So you can, twist an association however you would want to, and you can play a lot with the governance, which is quite great. But what we implement is really only the most basic, greatest common denominator that allows you to really run a fully functional Swiss association. And also kind of notable for this experiment was that it was entirely on-chain. And this was like somewhat difficult. So the development effort behind that took us between 3 and 4 months, really full-time, man months, or in that case, women months development effort of a really capable smart contract developer, right? So this was a decent amount of work because everything had to happen on-chain. And one thing that to me was very interesting was this exchange that we had there with Emily, like some weird questions, right? So what if, for example, some of these features that happen on-chain was also a general assembly, right? So what if we can schedule a general assembly that is 200 years in the future? Should we allow for something like that? And it showed us already one kind of weird aspect of like this normal legal infrastructure and technical infrastructure, that in a technical setting, we have to define everything, right? We have to define every single damn edge case that in a legal setting, if there's a dispute in front of court, you can resolve and can say, well, of course, that is ridiculous what you just did. Well, in code, you cannot, right? So that is one of the things that even to me was not so obvious when tackling this whole thing. So we had smart contracts, for example, for managing membership, so taking up new members of our DAA. We had fund management, so we had proposals, right? I can come up with a proposal that I would want to go to a conference, fly to New York, right, to attend William's conference, and I need funds for that. And then members would get to vote on it. So these were all aspects that we developed here, and the more technically inclined people can actually go on GitHub here on our Validity Labs account. We have the full implementation of that. I have the link here for you. We will share the slides after this discussion here, so you can go and check it out. Basically, only high level, and I will not get through all the details of the architecture, is we basically see an ensemble of over a dozen smart contracts that interact with one another. So we have this mothership of our decentralized organization, which is like a smart contract. It has treasury functions, it has proposal management functions, and it has kind of membership features, right? And all these are working with one another. And this is, again, because what we are writing here is not like, I sometimes call them now YOLO DAOs, right? So DAOs that completely ignore the legal infrastructure, because, for example, you have weird side effects that when the delegate of the DAO, so in the old world, we would call that typically a president, would step down, this DAA cannot actually actively engage in business activities. Now, what does that mean? For example, it means it cannot disperse funds. So basically, we had, just as one example, this weird side effect that if a delegate would step down and we don't have a new delegate in place, we need to block the wallet, right? So that's some of the features that we have to implement in such a fashion. So to me, it was really amazing to see that you can do such a thing, right? So we can build a fully legally compliant organization that entirely lives on the Ethereum blockchain. But what we can also see, it is pretty complicated. So that brings us a little bit forward to today when we started Hopper, our privacy project. So with Hopper, we're basically building privacy infrastructure, which you can use for blockchains, for medtech applications, for whatever you want to do. So for this project, where we have actual assets from which we pay salaries and manage a bunch of things, we're wondering, do we really want to use this thing that we built back then? And I still had this feeling, I knew how it felt when the DAO blew up, right? So when the DAO blew up and a lot of money went missing, even though we don't have the funding situation of the DAO, it still was pretty painful. And I think the DAO was basically at least 3 to 5 years ahead of its time. So we said, we want to go in very small baby steps. So what we do with what we call DecenGov, so it's Decentralized Community Enabling Governance. What we do here is in this first iteration, we have all off-chain interactions. So we start off really not with the DAO that is the legal wrapper, but we start with an association that has on-chain governance. So that is the first step that we take. So the first step is actually that we have token governance for an pretty much vanilla Swiss association. And then we add one thing on top of that, and that is that we add quadratic voting. So quadratic voting is, for the ones who are not familiar with it, I would recommend a blog that Vitalik was writing a couple of months ago, because it is really a middle ground between democracies, where there's one person, one vote, and kind of for-profit, like shareholder-owned corporations, where you basically have $1, one vote, right? So with quadratic voting, we have something in between where you can have a larger say if you are participating with a larger stake, but we also have this kind of grassrootish movement of getting a lot of people behind a certain cause. Because if you have 1,000 people behind a certain cause that all hold a small stake in your organization, maybe that is also important, or as opposed to having one large whale, right, that has a huge amount of participatory rights in an organization. And now, as a next step for us, we want to step by step moving things back onto a chain, right, or a chain-like structure, to move towards this DAA in a fashion that hopefully doesn't lead to the accidents that we have seen with the DAO back in 2016. So this DecenGov framework here is being used by Hopper Association today. So we are a completely normal association that is operative, and we are governed by a token, right? So that is our first step. And yeah, so I'm excited about this space and about other people engaging in this ideology and idea space to push us forward, right? To see how do we bring these different moving pieces together. And William, you mentioned a bunch of these elements already, right? So we have Aragon, which provides a lot of puzzle pieces that fit together. We also see Moloch DAO, which is also very simple, but is an entirely on-chain organization without a legal wrapper, right? So many of these pieces, I think, by now start fitting together, and we can bring these puzzle pieces together in a way that is not just technical, but also having this legal side to it. And that's what we're doing with Hopper Association, like really in production today.
Great, thanks, Sebastian. So it's great that you were able to now be, I would say, maybe, would you be the first association to implement this set of smart contracts?
Yeah, so we would certainly, I would say there's some other legal entities that have that have some on-chain interactions. For example, in the US, we have this DAO thing, right? There's a bunch of these ideas in that direction, but for this association or Swiss association-based model, Hopper Association would be the first one to run that model in production. But again, it's taking baby steps towards DAO, right? Towards a full on-chain decentralized association.
Great. I'm going to take two questions from the audience. There's one that's very interesting, and then I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to make an announcement with a little giveaway. So the first one, very quickly, is the DAA specific to Switzerland, or could it apply to the US as well? MME, maybe? Thomas or Luca, you are muted right now. I can't hear you.
Yeah, it's actually, I'm on my mobile. Yeah, okay. It's the DAA, as we conceptualized it, is based on Swiss law. So it's a Swiss legal concept. If you do know a similar construct, a similar legal concept in the US, you can actually apply it. Actually, you can make, can create a US DAA. That's not an issue. Should be possible. But what we created is based on the Swiss association legal anchor.
But could a company come to Switzerland and have a foundation, have an association in Switzerland, like Libra, for example? They were not based in Switzerland, but they made the association based in Switzerland.
Yeah, you have to actually distinguish between two things. One is actually the members. The members can be all over the world, but the association, because it's a legal entity, has to have a seat, and the seat must be in Switzerland, and it must be run in Switzerland. So actually, if you would say, okay, let's formally set up a DAA or an association in Switzerland, but we will run it outside of Switzerland, this would not work.
Okay. That's good to know. Second question is very interesting, and it came from Maria Gomez from Aragon. And the question is, how come nobody talks about the need for a legal wrapper for Bitcoin or Ethereum? A DAO is closer to a decentralized protocol than to a corporation. The DAO was a totally centralized thing, so it is not a good example. So obviously Aragon, as Sebastian alluded to, they are maybe more on the radical side of things, where they see everything as what they see. They believe in DAOs as DAOs without a legal wrapper necessarily. But I want to correct the question slightly, because to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Luca or Thomas, Ethereum does have a legal wrapper behind it. So it is a foundation. So it is not correct to say that how come nobody talks about the legal aspects behind Ethereum, because there is one. But the question is valid about Bitcoin. How come nobody talks about the need for a legal wrapper for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean,
it's again the question, what do you actually mean? Do you mean the network as such? So Ethereum or Bitcoin as a network, as a community, or do you mean the Ethereum project at the time of development, at the time of coordinating developers, open source software, and that was certainly Luca was more part of it, but that was the discussion at that time, how to coordinate the project, how to bring it to a level that we can deploy the protocol. However, then the maintenance of the protocol and kind of running it and communicating nodes and users, etc. That's again a totally different ballpark.
Absolutely, Thomas, you're right. And you see that one thing is actually the legal qualification of what is now this kind of decentralized protocols. What really happens is one of the big challenges which we still face. It's actually no answer yet that can be given. What is it really? How do we qualify all the users having an address on a Ethereum protocol interacting with each other? How do we qualify this? And we are very close to that, and we haven't a legal solution yet, because it's actually it does not exist under the existing legal concepts. These decentralized protocols with no, actually they don't have a legal anchor. And as Thomas said, the legal anchor, the time we had to launch, we launched Ethereum, we knew that we need to have a legal anchor to launch it, to launch and to propose the Genesis block to the community. And we knew that after it launched, actually it's out of hand. The community then decides, which version of the protocol they will adopt and use. So it is actually, if you talk about the legal anchor of Ethereum, yes, it was the legal anchor to launch and have sufficient funds to further promote. But you can't really actually have a governance structure. You can't call it a legal anchor governance structure.
What we have created there is actually the concept of, we call it cybernetic system, because the system itself with the nodes and users and the network, it's changing all the time. So there is no fixed status of it. So you cannot create kind of a common understanding that lasts more than just 1 second, because the next second there are other users, other miners, other stakers, other whatever participating in the network. So that's why we call it a cybernetic system. It's always interacting, always changing. So, and with that, you don't really have kind of a legal anchor or a legal entity that you can create, because 1 second later it's a different legal entity, etc., etc. However, for, let's say, just as an example, for VAT purposes, we just discussed actually this afternoon how to treat mining. And there you can, on that way, you can say the system itself is like a counterparty. So the system, the network is a counterparty, and the miner is interacting with the system in order to provide certain services. And this is important in order to conclude, to whom do I provide a service? Is it in Switzerland? Is it outside? Is it to someone? Is it to no one? And there we treat, or we would like to treat the system as like a legal, like a partnership in a way, but just as a counterparty. It doesn't actually act together. It's just there, and you can interact with that like as a tool. You just use it like a tool.
But Thomas, it's actually what we discuss is a new legal concept of a counterparty. Such kind of counterparty at the moment does not exist. It's really the cybernetic system. It's a little bit weird for, let's say, traditional lawyers, but that's how we try to explain, if we have to explain certain protocol and applications to the authorities. We have to translate it and to say, listen, here what is working, what's going on. And maybe coming back to the question of Aragon, it's whenever you have a user interface, a web interface or a mobile interface, then you add a centralization element to it, and then it gets more difficult, then it gets really more critical. And I think that was also the issue which was at the DAO, that, for example, the Financial Market Authority in Switzerland, they really looked at what they could see. They didn't look at the functionality of the smart contract. They actually looked at how it was actually sold and promoted and displayed.
Yes. So then the difference here, maybe it ties into one of the questions that came in. Is there a token that has to be issued for the association? And is it an option? Yes.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that. So actually, what we built in the DAA, if you look at the smart contract, you won't find a token in there. So what it actually is, we just have a membership registry. So there's absolutely no token in the picture. Okay. So we basically just, for the DAA, we had the, I would call it, traditional association model of one member, one vote, right? So there's no token in the picture. What we do for Hopper now is, because it's a decentralized protocol that has governance aspects and it ties in a utility token and a bunch of other sites. We wanted to say, well, those people who engage with that token, why not give them a stake in having a voting right? And this goes a little bit back also to the previous question, because one thing that I do see missing compared to the kind of like traditional ICO entities, if I may call them like that, is we have a decentralized network and then we have a legal entity, but they're disconnected. So basically what I see in putting that in a bit mean words is we have a decentralized network with decentralized amazing governance, but in the legal entity, you have 3 guys sitting behind closed doors making the decisions, right? And this, to me, is kind of ripe for disruption, and that we need this structure which allows the entity itself also to be governed in a decentralized, or let's maybe not call it decentralized, but in an open participatory fashion, right? And that is currently, for example, for the Ethereum Foundation, that is not the case. And it's some of the criticism that people, over the years were voicing on the Ethereum Foundation. Well, like maybe some grant proposal mechanism has not been so open, has not been participatory at all, right? So, and I think on that front, we can come up with some new solutions and new ideas to how we can combine really the governance at the legal entity level.
What we have seen there is, or discussed, that you can also combine the foundation with an association. So as an example, you have the foundation that is the holder of the assets. There is a purpose, so you're very sure that this is used for the purpose. However, you can introduce kind of an association of nodes, an association of members, of developers, whatever then the memberships are, and you can introduce this type of governance on that level and influence decisions on foundation level, if you want to do this and if you implement it like that.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that the difference here between the token in the traditional sense and the token in this particular case is that the token itself here is not a security, right? It is just more of a voting right. It's more of a true governance token. So the legal hurdles and the compliance hurdles, my understanding, will be much lower because it won't even enter the discussion of being a security. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's more like, your address is a membership certificate. Basically, it's a membership certificate, which as such is not transferable.
Yes.
And that's
okay,
it. That's
so
the functionality.
Okay, let's talk about this whole topic. I have a small announcement to make. Since we are on the topic of decentralized governance, I have been curating a site. So I am creating a new site called ondgov.org that will be covering real-time news and content on decentralized governance. So this is one of the series that I have. The first one was on coins, on Ethereum, on DeFi, and on stable coins. So this is the first time I'm announcing this. It's open today. And as another announcement, I have now created a new social money. That's another kind of token called WAM, W-A-M, my initials. So I'm going to give out 100 WAMs to the first 50 people that subscribe to the email for the OnDGov website to follow the news of decentralized governance. So you just go to the website tryroll.com, and the nominal value is about ½ cent. So I'm going to give you about 50 cents worth. And that token is really a social token. You can transfer it to it's an ERC20 token. So you can transfer it to your wallet, or you can hold it and you can redeem it later for other services. This is an experiment, in social money that I'm just announcing today, and this is something to be followed. There are many others already out there on the platform, and it is something to reward the attention of those that engage with me as a community. So it's another type of token. Maybe one day I may make it as a governance token where those that own it can vote on some certain decisions, or maybe I can give them access to something before others. So this is something that I wanted to talk about. We have a lot of questions. Let's see if we can go through some of them very quickly. What are the general costs in launching an association quickly? Any idea on costs?
Let me jump in on the tech side. So currently it's pretty expensive on the gas side of things. So it's going to be, I mean, what we implemented in this first version of the DAA is going to cost you a few million gas. So at prices of like 30 to 50 gigawatt that we see these days, do calculate a double-digit amount in US dollars.
The legal costs are very low, so you just go to our homepage, mme.ch, you download the template for the Articles of Association, you define your purpose, and you sign the document, and you have an association.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. We have a question from Bernd Lapp in Switzerland. He remembers Luca once explaining that a smart contract has some of the factors that define a legal entity. Can Luca explain this again? And if this is applicable, why does the smart contract system within the DAA cannot be the legal entity itself?
Yes, I remember that. That was in 2015 or 16. We had many ICO projects on our desk, and they showed us their funding smart contracts, their token generating smartity of such a token generating smart functionality, a functionality actually to organize people. And that's why actually we said, okay, if you leave it like this, you know, if you just have launch smart contracts for a project and you do not actually put it into a legal context, connected with a, let's say, a legal context, either you use it as a piece of technology under a foundation or whatsoever, you run even more unpredictable qualification of what you're doing, you know, with a smart contract. So actually, to get back to the question, a smart contract can have the basic element of an organization, and hence could be qualified as minimum partner, a simple partnership. And it will never be a legal entity as such.
Great. Thanks, Luca. We had a little bit of difficulties in, yes. Can you hear me now? We had some difficulties in hearing Luca, but I think it got better towards the end.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Problem with Luca. Usually you don't understand him very well. You know, he's such the up space, so it's quite hard to follow. But this time it was more than the the sound.
It was more like the, let's say, the physical recording. No,
we had to really pay attention.
Just quickly can sum it up. You know, a smart contract, the typical, yes, I mean the typical smart contract governance structure, which brings you close to a let's say, if close to qualification of whatever organization it is, but without a legal context which you can prove, it's very difficult to qualify it, to qualify what it is, you know. And so I would say, back to Bernd's question, you know, a smart contract as such has elements of an organization which legal entities have. To actually increase the legal certainty, you have to put the smart contract in a legal context.
Great. How much of the procedures or the processes of the member community need to be on-chain? I think Sebastian covered that. It's optional. Is that correct? You don't have to be on-chain from the beginning. Is it optional?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it depends how far you want to go. What we built with the DAA was entirely on-chain, right? So this thing was indeed entirely on-chain. And I mean, it's not just, you know, 50 gigawatt gas prices that I brought up here that is the reason, but people might be pissed off about that as well, right? Imagine a general assembly and you have to pay like $100 just in gas fees. But I mean, in fairness, this was what people thought like 2, 3, 4 years ago. We have everything on chain. And I mean, if you go back to the Ethereum page, the only thing that didn't happen is on-chain storage. Like, that was a bit of a stupid idea. But the thing is, and this is what we're trying now as well, right? So you have a vanilla association, and what you say in your articles of association, you say, hey, for voting, we're actually in our case going to do a fancy quadratic voting, but you could say, hey, the voting itself is going through a token-based voting, but that does not mean you have to build a voting smart contract. What you could simply do, and this is maybe the most simple example, you could say, hey, when you enter the door, you basically get a paper or like you vote by hand, right? And if you don't have enough tokens that entitle you to voting rights, you just don't get in. So effectively, we can have kind of compromises that decrease the technical risk, I would say.
And somebody asked that we repeat the link to the MME page, but we will send that in the follow-up email with a copy of the presentation and other relevant links that will be coming to all the attendees, and those that did not attend as well will be able to watch a replay. Since the token has no financial value, is it transferable?
So maybe let me jump in real quick here. In the case of the DAA, there was no token in the picture. So that really depends. You can structure that however you would want to. And to me, it's an open question. Can we have governance tokens without monetary value associated to them, right? So it depends entirely on how you structure it.
So what happens? Do you burn the token if a member is no longer a member and a new member take their place?
You burn and mint, yeah.
Okay. There's one interesting question. It's kind of related, but indirectly. How long until we might see on-chain securities in Switzerland?
Yeah, this is not an easy question. We are working on it, and you know, I would say we have. Yes. I think my connection is very bad.
Yes.
It's actually, let's make it short. This would be a topic for another hour. Let's put it like this. If people are interested, we can talk about, there are many challenges which we face at the moment with the regulator, but it would be just 1 hour actually talk about it.
That may be an interesting topic to consider for another session. The main topic, William, so the main topic actually is, I mean, you can technically do everything. But on the other hand, you want that if you transact kind of the token, you want that the legal right that is associated with the token is transacted as well. And that's maybe not that easy as people think sometimes, to synchronize the technology layer with the legal layer. Because depending on the jurisdiction, you have some requirements that it needs to be in writing, or there are other formal requirements attached to it. So, and that's kind of the main topic where we work on it, that is how to synchronize technology with law, and in order to make sure that if the token is transferred from Thomas to William, that also the underlying right, whether it's a security, it's a bond or whatever, is also transferred from Thomas to William. Because what is kind of the worst case, that I sell my token to you, you pay me, but I still have the legal right, you know, and that just creates chaos. And that's what we see sometimes. So that you have like reward tokens, they are sold, but at the end, the first owner still claims to be the recipient of the dividend later on, and that will create a lot of legal troubles.
Great. We're coming at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank everybody for attending. There were some questions we could not answer. We will do a follow-up. We are going to republish the presentation, so it will be available from MME. It will be available also on the Token Summit YouTube channel, and we'll follow up with the relevant links to everybody from the presentation and to everything that was mentioned. And we will see you later. Thanks very much for the attendees. Thanks, Thomas, Sebastian, Luca, Nadine, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, William.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, William, for enabling this. Bye-bye.